Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, America's leading World War I ace, said that aviation is proof that given the will, we can do the impossible. For centuries, war was always fought in two dimensions. With the advent of the first balloon, Zeppelin, and later the airplane, things changed. The crucial turning point of adding this third dimension of warfare was air power, that is, aerial bombing. This allowed military forces to weaken an adversary nation by dropping explosives on its strategic targets. It can be said that aerial bombing helped break the stalemate of World War I. It can definitely be stated that without air power, World War II would again be fought in the trenches. The turning point of controlled powered flight was made possible by the Wright brothers in 1903. After learning of this new flying machine, military officials jumped on the concept of incorporating aircraft into warfare, a turning point in the history of combat. Soon lighter and more powerful engines were developed, along with more efficient propellers. With added power came additional lift, which meant planes can now be outfitted with bombs and bomb sights. World War I demonstrated that something was needed to ease the grip of stalemate on the battlefront. Initially, the plane was not the solution because of their slow speeds and lack of range. The Zeppelin was the most fitting vehicle for long-range bombing. Used primarily by the Germans, the Zeppelins would fly over major cities and drop bombs. They inflicted little damage but struck fear into the hearts of the British, and badly affected morale. The Zeppelins were far from flawless. They were large, slow, and filled with hydrogen, a highly flammable gas which made them very vulnerable targets. Aircraft development proceeded swiftly in World War I, and in 4 years' time, a decade of progress was achieved. The airplane quickly replaced the Zeppelin because of its speed and improved durability. Tactical bombing was done from the air, over the battlefield, taking out enemy machine gun nests, artillery, and soldiers. The relative effectiveness of these battlefront attacks was offset by the high casualties pilots suffered, and a visitor to an early World War I battlefield would be hard-pressed to find evidence of the aeronautical revolution taking place. As the war came to a close, bombing had made a very small impact on the outcome of the war, but its potential to turn the tide of the war was seen by many military planners. The bomber's appearance over the battlefield signaled that the inability for war to progress was becoming less of an issue. Air power philosophers like America's Billy Mitchell saw the future and pressed for the development of bombers. This ultimately resulted in the creation of bombers of World War II, like the B-17 Flying Fortress, which became a major turning point on the battlefield for the Allies. The key to the modern bomber was larger, more powerful engines and heavier armament. The improved designs allowed the planes to use strong materials to construct their frames and give them the strength, stability, and speed to overfly strongly defended enemy territory. New bomb sights were developed, including the Norden bomb sight, which gave the bombardier control of the aircraft during the last 20 seconds of the bombing run, which proved to be a turning point in the bomber's accuracy. The American Air Force advocated the use of a method of precision bombing called pinpoint bombing. The goal was to hit a specific target, like petroleum plants, armament factories, or troop concentrations. The British, under Air Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, preferred area bombing, and his goal was to destroy the German housing. His belief was that the German population directly supported the war effort. Area bombing became the generally utilized method because weather and winds prevented Allied bombers' pinpoint accuracy. Area bombing targeted a large area instead of a specific building. The new targets were shipyards, airfields, and cities. Strategic bombing of cities became the main focus, and the goal was to break the nation's will to fight and cripple its economy. Shifting the focus of bombing cities raised new ethical questions because of the large number of civilian casualties. Just as the air power philosophers had predicted, World War II saw the bomber make an impact on the tide of the war, exactly as promised. Aerial bombardment kept the Second World War out of the trenches, allowing bombers to fly over enemy lines and attack factories and farms, feeding and arming the troops. The Germans began their strategic assault on Great Britain, and one of the first of a series of major raids spearheaded by bombers was the Blitz, during the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe was the first wave of the invasion of Britain, but the Germans failed to destroy British radar, deeming it unimportant. The failure to destroy the radar was a devastating mistake, for this allowed British fighters to be positioned accurately and the flak guns prepared before the Luftwaffe even crossed the English Channel. That major mistake made by the Germans would prove to be a turning point in the air war over Britain. The Germans had to cancel the invasion of Britain after a majority of their planes were shot out of the sky and not a single German soldier stepped foot onto British soil. However, this victory did not come cheaply, for the Luftwaffe killed an estimated 40,000 and left 1 million homeless. Little over a year after the Blitz, the bomber demonstrated its true potential as a major tool when the Japanese did the unthinkable, attacking Pearl Harbor. This momentous action motivated the United States to enter the war. The attack was executed by the Japanese level, dive, and torpedo bombers, which destroyed many battleships and other vessels. The sole reason that the Japanese bombers could even reach the harbor was the invention of the aircraft carrier, a turning point in aerial bombing. The aircraft carrier was a floating runway that could deploy bombers from anywhere at sea. Before it emerged on the battlefield, planes could not stray too far from the mainland, without risk of running out of fuel. The invention of the aircraft carrier solved this problem, and bombers can now get to and from their destination. As World War II proceeded, new instruments of destruction were introduced. One of the most effective of these was firebombing. Firebombing operated in 3 main waves. In the first of the 3 waves, bombers dropped flares in an X pattern to mark the city in the night sky. The second wave of aircraft dropped incendiary bombs, which were designed to light the city ablaze. As the fires burned, solid steel turned soft, wind supports burned away, and as the fire draws in oxygen, creating winds with speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, sucking people into the flames. As people run inside to try to shelter themselves from the raging fires, explosive bombs are dropped by the third wave. This blasts away the weakened structures, crushing anyone inside. This would continue until the city was completely demolished. This new tactic was used on the German city of Hamburg, the industrial backbone and port city of the Nazi war machine. Allied bombers rained spears of fire from the sky onto the city. In the end, an estimated 40,000 charred civilian bodies were pulled from the rubble, and 8 square miles of the city was completely destroyed. Firebombing was used later in the war when American bombers struck the city of Tokyo, Japan's capital. When this tactic was used on a city as densely populated as Tokyo, it had devastating results. Buildings were mainly constructed of wood and paper, which made the city light like a matchstick. After the bombs stopped falling, an estimated 100,000 civilians were consumed in the flames, and over 1 million were left homeless. As devastating as these results were, the whole concept of aerial bombing was turned on its head when in the New Mexico desert the first atomic weapon was detonated at Trinity in the summer of 1945. The nuclear age had dawned, and aerial bombing reached a major turning point. With atomic weapons, a single plane with a lone bomb could turn a fortified city into a smoldering pile of cinders. Scientists at Los Alamos, New Mexico later produced the uranium-based Little Boy and plutonium-based Fat Man. With the war in Europe ending, the United States' focus was shifted from the war in Europe to the war in the Pacific. The Allied forces slowly took back the Pacific islands Japan had conquered earlier during the war, liberating their native people. As the US approached Japan, the decision had to be made: drop the atomic bomb on Japan, or invade Japan with conventional weapons, as was done at Normandy. In the end, the predicted loss of American life for a conventional takeover was far too great, and the momentous decision was made. The US was going to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. At 2:45 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay, a Boeing B-29 Superfortress, took off from Tinian Air Force Base in the Pacific, headed for Hiroshima, loaded with the 9,000-pound atomic bomb Little Boy. At 8:15 a.m., the Enola Gay Bombardier released their first atomic weapon onto Hiroshima, a turning point in history delivered by means of aerial bombing. After falling for only 44 seconds, Little Boy was detonated 2,000 feet above the city. The nuclear explosion that followed came in 2 phases. The deadly fireball formed in the center of the explosion and created temperatures exceeding those on the surface of the sun. This consumed everything. It melted rock and turned bone to ash. The shockwave that followed the fireball traveled at nearly the speed of sound. It blasted down everything in its path, which left the target in ruins. Yet to the United States' extreme surprise, Japan's military government rejected the demand for unconditional surrender. The United States responded quickly when the president ordered the second bomb, the still experimental Fat Man, to be dropped in Nagasaki. 3 days after Hiroshima, on August 9, 1945, a B-29 named Boxcar was loaded with the weapon, and at 12:02 p.m., Fat Man exploded over Nagasaki. The Emperor of Japan at last made the decision to surrender, after the second bomb was dropped and after the Soviet Union declared war. Aerial bombing continued to develop during the Vietnam and Cold War. The space age added weapons such as ICBMs or intercontinental ballistic missiles, which made the bomber secondary means to nuclear weapon deployment. The fact remains that our nation is still threatened by the mass delivery of explosives delivered by missiles and technology of the space age. As we continue to deal with the crippling consequences of human conflict, turning points in history teach us that mankind is capable of increasingly innovative destruction, yet most importantly, that given the will, we can do the impossible.